Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final session of I Can't Wait to Get Back to the Office. I found this morning's session from Dr. Paige Hodsman absolutely fascinating. With my background in marketing, I really understand completely how deep insight into the customer's needs really is the foundation of any successful strategy. And the data and insights shared by Peggy this morning were incredibly interesting and powerful. To round off our event, we now have a case study showing how some of the really great theory around intelligent workplace design and some of the tools available to support this can be brought together on a real project. We've had some fantastic questions this morning's session, so it'll be really great. We can do the same again this afternoon. So please post questions in the chat forum on the site, and we'll get a Q&A session with Paige at the end of the presentation. For this session, I'm going to hand over to Andrea Hartman, our healthcare concept developer at Ecophon, who will introduce the final presentation of the day. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Jonathan. Welcome, everyone, to our final presentation of our two-day event. As Jonathan said, please, I'd like to encourage you to use the chat box on your screen to ask questions. Adrian will not be available for the Q&A session, but Paige will be answering. And if you have any questions specifically for Adrian, we'll forward them to him and he will respond later. So to properly introduce our speakers, Adrian Burton and Paige Hodsman. Adrian is an architect and master planner at the AWE, which is the Atomic Weapons Establishment. He's intent on starting a workplace trend to address head-on the known problem of noise in offices. He has been working on and authored papers on quantifying the impact of environmental conditions on worker performance and finance confidence modelling of staff productivity to put into a business case that justifies enhanced working design features. Paige is the concept developer for Workplace at Saint-Gobain Ecophon. She has spent much of the last 10 years focused on office acoustics, raising awareness of the psychological and physiological effects of sound on worker health, well-being and performance in office environments. She has written and published numerous articles, papers and book contributions on the subject of psychoacoustics in the workplace. Welcome.
Hello. This presentation is a plea to you to acknowledge that the design of desk areas is below par due to noise levels, particularly for some individuals, and that we need to listen to them more carefully if we were ever to improve the design of offices. So Open Plan was developed by engineer Frederick Taylor early last century. But despite huge advances in the design of meeting and collaboration spaces, the design of desk areas has hardly progressed. And behind the Google collaboration rooms and other innovative spaces, there are still rows of desks offering little privacy. And even Google has their highly prized coding staff in alternative spaces. Now, research by Nigel Osland shows that hybrid open plan is more highly rated than private offices. So open plan is here to stay. And Leesman surveys tell us that 60% of people are dissatisfied with noise levels in offices. So we have to have a different mindset to address head-on the problem of noise in offices, rather than doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Einstein's definition of insanity. The current offering is not fit for purpose, a 1-star rating at best. We are not listening to our customer, but increasingly our customers have the option to work from home. And work by Dr. Peggy Roth and Leesman shows that typically people feel more productive working at home. So the company office now has real competition. And we know that noise distraction has a significant impact on productivity. And for some people working at home, they can work without distraction. but the option of working from home is not available to everybody. Indeed, research by Gensler shows that 40% still want to come to the office to focus on work. And there's a disparate range of reasons why people want to come to the office to focus. So if you're in a bedsit, or Aunt Mabel is at home, if you want to be in the office, have a fear of missing out, or if your manager insists on attendance in person. For those on secret networks or supporting laboratory or factory workers. New workers who want to understand the world of work, the way things are done around here, the culture. And for some with neurodiverse conditions who need routine. And for those who come to the office attending interactive sessions, but also need time afterwards to reflect. So office desks are still required. Now, those with neurodiverse conditions particularly struggle to work in open plan environments, and we need to understand why. And our neurodiverse community at AWE have told us, and it's not happy reading. They said, I dread the idea of going to a large open plan office. Sensory overloads for me happen at work. I hope the new office has areas for people to use when they require some peace and quiet. But I am not optimistic because I don't think this need is fully understood or appreciated by those who are designing it. And she is right. Designers use their own abilities and biases as a starting point and end up with products or environment that are designed for people like themselves, often extroverts. So the key to progressing the design of desk areas is to understand the needs of the outliers, the minority, including those who are particularly sensitive to noise. So we have teamed up with Paige Hodsman from Ecophon and focused on a group of software coding engineers for whom it is almost a job requirement that they are on the autistic spectrum to undertake their work.
Thank you, Adrian. So now what I'll do is I'll take us through the particulars and some of the details in the case study. We had 14 participants, and we are at stage 2 of 4 stages in this study. We have left to do a physical intervention in which we will change out some of the acoustic conditions, physical conditions in the space, and then we'll follow along with physical measurements again, and then a survey and interviews to find out both objectively and subjectively how the condition had changed with a physical intervention. All of our subjects were neurodiverse. We're specifically looking at autistic spectrum conditions and sensory sensitivities. However, just as a caveat, in no way was this meant to be diagnostic. We used some tools in order to give us a general insight, but by no means were we trying to diagnose in any way. The primary work setting for our 14 participants is a cubicle setting with standing height privacy. So it was a complete furniture solution. Our psychoacoustic data from the more of the psychological side, we used the Ecophon psychoacoustic tool, which is comprised of the Ocean Big 5 personality trait inventory and a bespoke acoustic survey that we have created in-house over the years, which enabled us to look at a host of factors around how people work, where they work, when they work, what particular sounds are problematic, and what type of conditions, acoustic conditions, are more favorable. Then when we went to look at the physiological or the sensory side, we used the Sensory Intelligence Sensory Matrix tool. This tool was the best tool for us to use in this particular instance. One of the main reasons is it breaks down the different responses within the sensory system. So, for example, you're able to see specifically an individual's sensitivity to the auditory sense, rather than just giving an overall sensitivity score. We also took physical before measurements, and these were in accordance with the ISO 3382-3, which is the guidance for setting up the acoustic equipment and measurement paths for acousticians for measuring different variables for open plan offices. As you can see on the left of our table, we have 3 rooms. So our room in this study is room 1. Room 2 and 3 were typical open plan offices with bench seating and sort of low screens between the desks. And what we wanted to do is have 2 separate type of offices to compare to ours, so that we could have a comparison to the more traditional setting of an open plan office. And what you can see as we read across the numbers to try to make some sense of all of this, I'll do my best. When we see the D2S, so D2S is telling us what the sound pressure level is from a starting point and then over a particular distance doubling. And what we're looking for here is to ascertain how well that environment is helping to reduce the sound pressure level over a particular distance, over a very specific distance. And ideally, the target values that are set in the standard, we want that number to be greater than or equal to 7. And as you can see, we didn't quite meet it. We came close in room 2, path 1, but we didn't really meet it with any of the rooms. The LPAS 4 meters, so that is our A-weighted sound pressure level at a distance of 4 meters. And ideally, we want this number to be less than 48 dB. And then again, the idea here is to reduce the sound or the spread of sound over a distance, in this instance 4 meters, and this is helping us to reduce the distractions that may be caused by speech. Then we see the radius of distraction. So the RD is the radius distraction. This is measured in meters. And what we find here, ideally, you want this number to be less than or equal to 5 meters. And this is where we're finding really quite a discrepancy. And in fact, our path 1 in our room with the standing height privacy cubicles, we have nearly 12 for our radius of distraction. So that's quite a big number. And then the STI, we'll look at the STI. We want to see that. So that's the speech transmission index, and we want that number to be less than 0.5. So as you can see, we didn't really meet any of the suggested targets. However, there's a caveat to this. Those targets are incredibly difficult to meet, if at all possible. And in the UK in particular, the numbers that we see for the rooms that we measured, these are actually quite typical. These are the numbers that we typically see. So one of the main points that's drawn is the high numbers on radius of distraction. And if we compare it to rooms 2 and 3, which were just a typical open plan, we have to start asking ourselves what's going on, because we've got standing height privacy cubicles. We should see that number much lower, and it isn't. So now we have to ask ourselves what physically is in that space that's contributing to the increase of the spread of the sound pressure levels of speech. Or just the spread of the sound pressure levels themselves. And so this is where we look at the particular materials and start to analyze what's the furniture made of, what's happening with the floor, what's happening with the ceiling. So we can start to investigate something here, which is what we did. So this is an example of the results that we get for a sensory result. I'm sharing with you my sensory report because all of our responses were anonymous for our participants. So I'm just giving you my report to show you the kind of and the level of detail that we can get to with this particular tool. This tool was created by Anne-Marie Lombard from Sensory Intelligence. And what we see are 3 bands running horizontally across our table. The lower band are the low threshold, or that's the more sensitive range. We have a neutral band, and then we have a high band, a high threshold or less sensitive range. And Anne-Marie uses a tree analogy to help understand a little bit better about the sensitivities. And so our lower bands could be equated to roots of a tree. They sort of like to be underground. They don't like a whole lot of disturbance. They like it nice and quiet, maybe a little dim with the lighting, not too bright a light. Our neutral thresholds is the area where we're just really we can handle the stimulus quite well. So we're not undersensitive, and we're not oversensitive either. And then our high thresholds are likened to the leaves of a tree. So with the leaves of a tree, they're exposed to everything, and they like it. They love that. They need it. They need the sun, and they need the rain, and they need the interaction with the animals and the birds and the insects. And as you can see with my particular profile here, most of my sensory systems fall in the low threshold, in the root categories. And then you see that my overall all systems is -17. But what's unique about this particular tool and why we find it quite useful is we're able to draw out my specific auditory score, which is a -10. So rather than just an overall systems, which wouldn't really give me a clear indication of my auditory in particular, this tool enables us to see them. And for clarification, multisensory is how the senses are working together to produce the energy and activity levels. And this also helps us to decide why we might choose a particular environment. Okay, so when we looked at our participants, these are the all system results of our participants. And what we find is the vast majority are in the more sensitive, low threshold range. We have 4 that are in the neutral or the trunk range. And then there were 2 people that were actually high threshold or less sensitive. When it comes to just the auditory only results, we had 4 people that were in the neutral zone, and then all of the rest were in the low threshold range. So what this tells us is that typically, and actually this is supportive of other research, that particularly with autism spectrum conditions, there is a heightened sensitivity to auditory stimulus, and when we're seeing that with our sampling as well. So the vast majority will have a sensitivity. Although a caveat here, and I'll talk about this later in the findings, is that just because there's a sensitivity, it doesn't mean that everybody is responding the same way to that stimulus. Then we looked at personality, and this was the results of the Ocean Big 5 personality profiling tool. And what we find here is the vast majority of our group are more conservative in their personality trait. They are more conscientious, so when they come to work, they're ready to work. They're less likely to maybe play games during the day or do things that are not kind of a traditional or associated with work, with traditional ideals of work. We see that we have a higher percentage who are introverted. a higher percentage that are challenging as well, which in this instance is really good because it's actually a fantastic group to work with, because when we're putting information forward, we get just brilliant results back and really good questioning as far as the what, why, where, which is really good. It just makes the information that much more robust. And then we also see higher levels of neuroticism. And the work that we've done previously, we have found the relationships with personality traits and auditory sensitivity, and primarily it's introversion and neuroticism. So higher levels of introversion and higher levels of neuroticism, we find that there are a related higher level of auditory sensitivity. So having this aggregate information, having this information up front in a design phase in particular, is going to tell us, it's not descriptive not prescriptive, but what it's telling us is that we really need to pay attention to the auditory conditions of the space, because our group is more likely to have a sensitivity and to be more affected from a performance and productivity perspective. So then what we see here is we're looking at the amount of time that our participants are spending in focus work. And so our benchmark is the green horizontal bar, and the benchmark is based on just over 3,000 respondents to the Ecophon psychoacoustic tool. So we've surveyed people globally, and that becomes our benchmark figure. And against the benchmark, we see that our group is spending a lot more time. We see from the 61 to 100% of their time is spent in focused work, which is what we expected. And then when we look at the adverse effects on productivity, stress levels, or well-being, again, we see that our group is being affected more by the acoustic condition than the benchmark. Here we're looking at productivity, and this is really interesting. This was an interesting graph. When in our subsequent studies and looking at the respondents and the response around productivity, we typically see a graph that's similar, but this was by far the most significant difference around all of the factors. So your green dot is the upper quartile of our benchmark, and the red dot is the lower quartile of our benchmark. So anytime we see participants responding where we're dropping below the red dot, then we know this is an area we have to pay attention to. And in this instance, you can see we've dropped below the red dots, but significantly so on a number of factors, like the ability to have quiet work and concentration, the teleconferencing, and the confidential phone calls. So this is giving us a real clear indication that there are a lot of design measures really that need to be sorted. Then we have a question about the self-reported loss of productivity. Our benchmark is around a loss of 6%. And for this group, for our participants, it was a reported loss of 10%. Which is those are, I don't know if you're familiar with the comparison of productivity figures against an organization, but really anything around 5%, a loss of 5% is really significant. So when we're moving up around 10%, this is a big number. This is something we really have to be paying attention to. So our summary and our conclusions are that our group of participants were more conservative. They had higher levels of introversion, higher percentage of challenging personality trait, and neuroticism. All systems sensory sensitivity was in the low range for some, but not all. So we had a couple of leaves in our group. But yet the vast majority did fall into the low threshold for auditory sensitivities, with the exception of 2. We also, in the follow-up, we ask a whole lot of questions, and we ask for comments and feedback. And it's in the comments and the feedback that we really get good information about what's really going on with individuals. And this is where we find there's a vast difference in the coping mechanisms that are used. Everyone had different needs. And our conclusions, it was really clear at the end that one size does not fit all. Even with this rather small group, they had really different ideas about how they wanted to work. So we had a couple that wanted private offices and were quite happy to have a private office. But the vast majority wanted a private office in order to be able to concentrate, but they didn't want to be stuck in a private office all day long. They wanted to be able to come out and to socialize and have that option, really. The best use of space is based on the needs. It's got to be around the needs of the people, because this feeds back to the performance and the productivity and the overall health of the organization itself. And much more importantly is the health of the individuals. So looking at a space budget versus a cost budget, I think is one of the clear indicators here, which Adrian will explain in more detail. Thank you.
So AWE, like most progressive organisations, recognise that diversity of minds contributes to our goals. 1 in 7 of the populations have neurodiverse conditions, which include dyspraxia, dyslexia, attention deficit, autism. Their minds work differently, but as Jamie and Lyon says, if you know one person with autism, then you know one person with autism. But typical characteristics include sensory overload leading to meltdowns or shutdowns. They may be particularly sensitive to sounds, sights and smells. They process information differently. They often need time to prepare or to absorb new information. And some like certainty or dislike change. They can be uncomfortable in social situations and sometimes are easily distracted or unable to tune out background noise such as vibration. But there are design solutions, and these should be integrated into office briefs and designs. And the key change is the provision of focus offices within the open plan context. Cellular offices with doors that are bookable. And in our new hub office, we are providing just such rooms, located in the centre of the open plan to help break up the openness of open plan, with more hidden desk areas behind. And we also have alternative desk areas in our atrium, knowledge centre and outside. So in addition to the typical desk settings of touchdown, team working and project, we are including a 4th category, focus offices, rooms where people can shut the door and concentrate. Now, to avoid these becoming private offices, booking rights to these desks are granted following an occupational health assessment. And our neurodiverse staff have typically said they do not want to spend the whole day in these rooms. And for some of the day, they want to sit with their teams. But the key principle is that each individual can select a work setting where they can perform at their best. And so just as with restaurant design, office design needs to avoid uniformity and provide choice and variety. Now, focus offices will inevitably increase the cost of the building for the sake of a few. So can we afford it? Well, can we not afford it? How much productivity are you willing or authorised to lose? And the same cost arguments were expressed by architects when pioneer Selwyn Goldsmith was campaigning to improve accessibility for those with physical disabilities. But over time, inclusive design has moved from optional best practice to standards, regulations, and rights. And by designing for the minority of physically disabled, we also help others. such as those returning to work after accidents. And step-free access not only helps wheelchair users, but also young parents. And similarly with the focus rooms, when they're not occupied, they can also be used to make private calls or for video meetings. So just as it is now inconceivable that we would design town halls like this that exclude or do not welcome mobility impaired persons, we should not be designing offices that provide a very real barrier for those with autism or sensory processing disorders. And this is the key to improving office design for all. So please do ask your clients, what proportion of potential employees are you willing to exclude by the design of your working environments? And as leading workplace influencers and acoustic designers, please use your influence to make designs more inclusive, and particularly incorporate cellular rooms within the open plan context. Provide distinct areas of desking and provide alternative locations. And let acoustic considerations take the lead so that the design becomes more people-centric. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that really interesting presentation that reinforces the need for developing workplaces that suit the needs of all the users of a space. We've now got time for a question and answer session. So yeah, if I could just start off here, Paige. The work that you did is based around acoustics, but I was wondering if, you know, aside from the acoustics, did you find other similar sensory thresholds?
Yeah, actually, interestingly, so if we looked at all of the sensory systems that are measured in the sensory intelligence profiling, the two that seem to have the kind of the highest numbers when you look at all of the scores. Of course, the auditory came out the highest, and then second to that was visual, which I think probably makes a whole lot of sense. It still wasn't as high as the auditory. I think the auditory is about 39. Looking at all of the scores, it was minus 39, whereas the visual I think was minus 20. So, but still significant. There were many of our respondents that came back with visual sensitivities, so low threshold on the visual. But I also want to reiterate too, we only had 14 respondents, so I just want to be careful with overgeneralizing. For our sake, it's useful, but there's more research that's needed around this for sure.
Needed to be done, yeah, I appreciate that. So looking at the auditory and the visual, do you think that then links in, sort of how does that then link into the design of the space?
Well, see, funny enough, because, and I think, I mean, you understand this as well, when we start to think about auditory privacy as well as the visual privacy, and often, I mean, these very often go hand in hand, don't they? In fact, I found in some of my work previously, where people will even interpret the visual distraction as an auditory distraction as well. So they interpret them as the same thing, and both can be. We know that, don't we? That both can be incredibly distracting.
For people, yeah. The links between the two. And then looking at the personality traits, how did you link those to the sensory profiles?
Yeah, actually, that was kind of required a little bit of a little bit of thinking, because we wanted to make the respondents, or the responses, and the profiling, we wanted to make it anonymous. So we had the Ecophon psychoacoustic tool, which was comprised of the Ocean personality, as well as the Ecophon proprietary acoustic questionnaire. And then we had the sensory intelligence matrix. And what we did is we asked everyone to come up with a pseudonym. And so we, rather than putting their real names in, we had everybody create a pseudonym, which was quite comical. It's quite good. And then once they created their pseudonym, then we just used that to then log in to sensory intelligence. They worked with us, because also you get a report with sensory intelligence. You get a 26-page report following on from that survey. And so we had it they all went back to one email, the sensory report, and then that was divvied back to the respondents. And then my connection was based on a pseudonym. So we had the order in which they were taken. Yeah. And then that's where we could match the pseudonym with the profiling. And so we did it that way. But that was the best we could come up with, because we really wanted to make sure that everybody felt confident with the anonymity of the responses.
And so they all received their individual 26-page report that they could then sort of study in their own time. And did you get any feedback from that, from the individuals?
Did we get a feedback from the individual? You mean on the sensory profiling?
Yeah, or on that side of it.
Well, yeah. So the general feedback was that that they were quite pleased, really quite pleased to have this information. But also, what was interesting is because they all know themselves pretty well. So I think it was just it was something really nice to have, and it validated a whole lot of what they've been saying. So it was, but it is, I mean, I must admit, is really quite a nice feature of that tool. You do get a really nice 26-page document that's useful, as it was intended, more practically, because as I said in the presentation, it's not diagnostic.
We have another question here. Why did the AWE want to take this approach?
Okay. Now Adrian can answer this much better than I can, but I do know a bit about why as we started to have this conversation. So in the projects that they had done previously, this was one area, the acoustic area was one area where they were having some difficulty. And Adrian and I, actually, it was a number of years ago, we started talking about the kind of work that we've been doing. And he said, I want to get this right. So let's do whatever we can to get as much information as we can to put forward. And then they have the bigger project that they're working on. And he just wanted to have the facts in front of him. And then they also wanted to be able to create an in-house guidance document as well, so that they can continue to use this information repeatedly and then share it also, to the wider world too.
So that sort of is a sort of an outcome from the project. So that was going to be sort of the next question, really. The information that you and Adrian have now is how is that going to be used moving forward, and all the work that you're doing together. What's the next steps, really, I suppose?
Okay, so with that, following on from that previous question, so for the AWE, it is to have an in-house document so that they have a really clear idea of the decisions that they're making and why they're making them, and then ultimately they want to create the best environment they can for everybody. And so, as Adrian said, by looking at this particular group and focusing on those with heightened sensitivities, et cetera, ultimately what we end up with is a better solution for everyone. And then what it kind of grew from there, actually, which has been really good. So what we discovered is on this particular subject for people with autism in particular, and these heightened sensory sensitivities, a specific guidance document. I know in the UK in particular, we don't really have anything that in depth. For education, for students, there's a lot of information, but for adults in the workplace, we just don't. So we've actually teamed up with the University of Reading, and as I said, we're in stage 2 of 4 stages. So what we want to be able to do is do a little bit of physical intervention, then learn some more about this project, pull all that together, and then turn this into a proper guidance document, working with the university, and then be able to disseminate that information to the industry as a whole, to try to help, because we also think that there's an awful lot of individuals that would like to work or work more, maybe go from no work to part-time or part-time to full work, but the actual conditions of the offices themselves prohibit that, make it very difficult for some people. And if we could correct that, I think we can open up job opportunities for people, and also educating organizations as well to how to be more knowledgeable and to be more aware.
Yeah, and we're all individuals, aren't we? So that applies to everybody. If there's choice, if there's control over your own environment, it's got to be to the good, hasn't it? It's that flexibility.
Do you know, and if you think about it, if you think about what Nigel said, Nigel talking about the importance of choice, and you think about what Jack Harvey Clark was saying, he's talking about the best acoustic solutions are when you provide choice for people. We saw it demonstrated with Peggy's presentation. Well, I tell you too, if you look at the element of control in human psychology, it makes a lot of sense why this matters, because it drives us. Control is fundamental. It's fundamental to our existence. And so I think that makes it does make a lot of sense. And I think what's nice too is if you look at the subjects and you look at the different perspectives, just even amongst the speakers from the last 2 days, we're kind of coming up with some of the very, very similar conclusions. And it's not just us, of course. I mean, there's a whole host of brilliant people out there who have, they've been spouting on about this for a long time. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just looking for any more questions here. It would appear that's the end of the questions that we've had submitted today. So I'd like to thank you, Paige.
Thank you, Andy,
for the presentation and the questions and answers. And I'd like to hand back to Jonathan to close the event.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, Andy. So with that great case study from Paige and Adrian, we've now reached the end of our event for the last 2 days. For me, the 4 presentations that we've seen over those 2 days have really told a great story. Dr. Peggy Roth giving us data and analysis of what really drives the needs and motivations for office space and the users of that space. Coming then to Nigel, Dr. Nigel Osland, challenging us to think human-centered when we go away and start to design spaces that meet those needs. Moving through then to Jack Harvey Clark, showing us that there's design guidance and standards that are available to help us build and deliver them spaces for people. And then finally with Adrian and Paige, really demonstrating how that can all be brought together in a real life example on a real project that's happening right now. So I think a really great story built over those 4 presentations. A fascinating series of presentations and discussions, and I'd really like to say a massive thank you to all the presenters for making the session so informative and interesting and taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us over the last 2 days. It really made it really interesting and thought-provoking. I'd also like to thank the team, Paige, Andrea and Kat at Ecophon, and all the guys at Emerald Colour for making these sessions happen. I know it's a huge amount of work that goes into these things, and I really appreciate all the efforts that go in. But most of all, I'd like to thank everybody who's been attending. I really hope you found the presentations really interesting, thought-provoking, and that they give you plenty of ideas on how you can go away and create workplaces that people really do want to get back to, and that they really do love being in. So I hope you've got that from the sessions. One last reminder that all the presentations, all the materials, all the literature will remain online for several months. So please revisit, go back to the presentations, get hold of the videos and the case studies and the literature, and please feel free to pass on the registration details so other people can register after the event and go and view the videos and use the resources there as well. So with that, thank you again for attending. Thank you for taking time out of your diaries and coming along to the events. And I wish you all a really great evening. Thank you. Goodbye.